Welcome back. This is Keys to the Cloud, podcast provided by Redx Carbon. And today we have Vaz Saraphanian here with us to talk about a very important subject, mergers and acquisitions, and when it comes down to migrations from source to target using Microsoft technologies. He is probably one of the best resources in Canada that can drive a lot of corporations to that kind of exercise. But before we start, Vaz, can you tell us what you do at Redx Carbon today?
Sure. So I'm one of the partners at Redx Carbon, and I head up our professional services tower, which essentially means that I work with a group of great technology consultants that are passionate about technology. We deliver projects for our clients, and I'd say M&A projects are our specialty and something that we really enjoy delivering. They can be highly complex, highly technical, and we enjoy that challenge.
Perfect. We're probably going to touch a little bit about the Trinity down the road, so to get people to understand how you actually run the projects at Redx. All right, perfect. So thanks for the intro, Vaz. So let's dive into it. First thing that comes to mind is why corporations need to go through what they go through from mergers and acquisitions perspective when it comes down to Microsoft technologies, right? So what are the key components? Why do they actually have to consider this place?
Yeah, so great question. Of course, you see the headlines, a company has been acquired or sold, or different companies are merging. It's quite interesting for us, the chain of events that kicks off on the back end, because you maybe doesn't come to mind all the technology integrations that are going to have to occur as part of these M&A activities. Mm-hmm. So some of the goals, of course, are to reduce infrastructure, reduce cost, streamline business operations and processes as part of the new entities being formed. And of course, additionally, you want to improve collaboration because now you have different groups of employees that are now going to be working together. Mm-hmm. And often as part of these mergers, you want to modernize your technology systems and introduce new features to your end users.
So I would assume that based on, it would be very interesting to understand. Let's suppose you were doing an M&A, so two large corporations or a big and a large company acquiring another one that has potentially better technology than the first, right? Or the opposites, right? So there are certain considerations that people don't take when they actually look into the technologies to be merged, right? And the challenge that we have with those as well. And that become an oversight, okay? So if you think about from at a high level, I know we're going to talk about an initial assessment and everything that comes to it, but at a high level, from a leadership perspective, when those discussions are occurring about getting two companies together, what are some of the key components that you have to consider in order to have the technologies being integrating with each other?
Great questions. I'll probably start with the non-technical first of things we look for. So first we'll say, is there a TSA, a transition services agreement? Mm-hmm. Often exists in many of the large M&A activities. And within that, it depends how well defined is this TSA? Does it have specific deadlines on when certain activities have to occur? Does it define what systems are merging into what the combined entity will have from a technology perspective? And what we find is there typically will be a lot of key deadlines and milestone type guidance, but a lot of the technical details will have to be hashed out.
So what you're saying is that we should be looking to the contractual obligations first, and based on your experience, when we do get engaged, how fast do we get to see a TSA from clients?
Yes. I would say to wrap our head around it, we definitely need to understand the contractual obligations, and that's whether defined in a purchase agreement or more specifically in the TSA. And then beyond that, we get into other areas like regulatory and compliance. What is the industry we're operating in? And as part of this merger, what kind of legal and regulatory frameworks do we have to abide to? That's critical. And then this is all before we even get to the technology. Then I say let's jump into governance of this project. It's going to be a highly complex project. It's going to should have a steering committee, like a steerco, as we call it, executive sponsors, program managers, project managers, all the way down to cloud consultants and engineers that are working on the project. So we have to understand that framework in terms of the people involved and the communication that has to happen to all involved in governing the project. And furthermore, I'd say then I jump into the communication to end users, which is going to be very critical. What is the communication framework where the users in both entities are going to be communicated to on all the changes that are going to occur? That has to be rock solid.
Got it. And we're not even touching the technology.
We have not even touched
right?
the technology yet.
And I do understand that there is a lot of sensitivity with those merges at times. There is a need-to-know basis as well, right? And I understand that sometimes we get clients coming to us, and before they release any type of information, we have to sign an NDA, right? And those are very important. We have to be watching for miscommunications or holding communications until the point that everybody inside the corporations get to know that kind of merges will occur. Right?
Yeah, great point. You're getting into some of the legal nuances as well, and that's true. There are certain things that are being discussed at, let's say, the steerco level that can't immediately be released to the end users, and that is some of the key sensitivities of a project like this.
Okay. So before we dive into the technologies themselves, right? So is there any best scenario that you would say from getting into a project like that that we would advise corporations, especially corporations that are looking to acquire someone or not, how early or at which stage you believe that they should be contacting companies like ours or their own personnel, their own technologists inside the corporations in order to go and evaluate how that's going to go?
That's a great question. I would say as soon as possible. And you're right, you speak to our experience where oftentimes we're talking about deals that could be billions in value and have been on many that we've worked on. And they decide on certain deadlines. And even if they have some expectations of complexity in the transition technology-wise, it's not well developed enough. And ultimately what you find is impossible deadlines to achieve integrations which have very serious legal or financial commitments tied to them, which then places a lot of pressure to come up with solutions in a short amount of time. The sooner even that is discussed, the better.
I got it. And then, again, take into consideration the sensitivity that is to get potentially two IT departments getting to shake hands and say, how can we make this happen, right? And understandable, it is understandable as well that those IT departments, they're busy as is, and all of a sudden a company gets to be acquired and you have way more work that needs to be performed than they actually can accommodate.
Correct.
Hence the fact that they go to their partners, their network of vendors to make that exercise happen, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so let's now dive into the technology itself. We talked about the reasons behind, so we talked about as well what you should be watching for from contractual obligations and everything else. Let's dive into the technology and starting with what we would be looking first when it comes to those M&As, Vaz.
Perfect. Yeah, so as we noted, there's contractual, legal, compliance, governance, communication, all those things, but the real fun for us as techies is the technology. So first thing I look for is understanding the identity model. That's a big one for us in the sense of understanding what are the number of Active Directory force at play, what M365 tenants are at play, what other identity providers are in the mix, is there synchronization from the on-premise directories into the cloud, just that whole framework, all the various authentications occurring against different systems. And we need to wrap our heads around what exists now and start to look towards what will be the end state on that.
Okay. I'm assuming that identities, of course, is not going to be used just to log in to get access to emails, right? So you're talking about multiple technologies that depend on identities, and a lot of times they're not Microsoft technologies, right?
Yes, exactly, which brings me to my next point, which is the technology workloads. It would, of course, there's Exchange for email, but then SharePoint, OneDrive, file servers, Teams, public folders still exist often, mobile devices, an MDM, your workstations, and then a whole big category of applications,
Yes.
which we know can be, off-the-shelf SaaS products, custom solutions. That is a huge component in itself. And then even getting into things like VPN, Wi-Fi. So all of these technology workloads, integrations, applications, we need to understand them all across both entities being merged. And then we start to work towards, so we understand the identity model, we understand all the technology workloads, and then we start working towards an end state solutioning model of how are we going to combine all of these things. And you touched upon it earlier, even there'll have to be some decisions on some applications are going to disappear, whose technology will remain. Often if it's a big entity acquiring a very small entity, a lot of the big entity systems will be maintained, but you also can't get rid of some of these older legacy systems immediately. So it's definitely a process.
It makes sense. So it went from a migration perspective or merge, you're looking to now which applications needs to be merged to each other as well, right? Take an example of SAP systems, right? So perhaps both companies have SAP running for multiple purposes, and now you have to go and work with other companies, other professionals that perform those type of migrations as well, right? CRM solutions and so on.
Absolutely. And this is where we also get into, when I say the end state solutioning, we get into the phases of a project. Often these projects are at least 6 to 12 months. For some of the larger, more complex, 12 to 24 months, multi-year projects, which are going to have various phases. Certain immediate deadlines on operating as a new entity, longer-term technology deadlines. So we'll have to work on all that and develop a long-term plan with various phases.
Got it. So that's quite interesting. And I do understand that we run into situations where there were deadlines to be met, where the deadline itself didn't dictate for things, for the companies to be fully merged. But there was an occasion, maybe you want to touch on that, where we had to get mail flow coming out or in from a specific entity. Can you explain a little bit, just expand on that challenge, because I know that was a great one for you guys to solve.
Yes, definitely one of the examples. So what we have sometimes is two companies are merging and they have to operate as a new entity with new domains, new branding at a specific date. But that date does not support all of the technology systems of both entities being merged. So then we have to get into very creative solutions, one of which you highlighted, which is there's an example where we introduced a new domain into an Office 365 tenant, and that had to be the public-facing domain, yet behind the scenes, we did mail routing to two separate systems. We had M365 kind of acting as our SMTP traffic controller, and then delivering to two different hygiene solutions, in this case CES and Ironport, then back into the systems and then back into the cloud to make this immediate deadline of a financial regulatory body, a new financial regulatory body operating from that deadline. And it was quite an awesome solution that we came up with in the end.
That's very good. So for the external world, emails coming from that or being received by that entity now is working.
Yes.
Right? And then you're going to have to catch up with what's happening on the back end in order to get those transitions.
Exactly. Initially, we're going to have to keep two separate hygienes, but then now you've got to the public-facing world a new entity, and now you have to continue your complex processes to merge the two entities over time.
This is while day-to-day business just continues to run.
Still operating, exactly,
right?
while being as minimally disruptive as possible to the end users who have to continue their day jobs.
Yeah, I can understand how stressful it could be for the IT departments of both entities as well. Help desk might have to be all hands-on to make sure that those type of integrations or changes in the environment can or cannot be addressed properly when the user is calling to the help desk and so on and so forth, right?
Perfect, yes. You're getting into some of the nuances, like we have to communicate with multiple IT teams, you have to communicate with multiple help desks, you have to train them on how to answer questions from end users that come in. So a lot goes into it, and I guess that's part of the reason why initially we stressed the non-technical in terms of the governance model and the overall project framework, because all of these other nuances are going to come up and you have to be prepared for it.
Got it. So one of the other challenges I heard from the team when they performed that is the fact that at times the companies don't know or don't have a proper inventory of the systems that exist on their premises or even the cloud, right? And I remember a discussion that you had with others where you have to have business owners and application owners dictating how those applications actually work in order to get them to be transitioned. Do you recall some of that on your conversations?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's another key point. Let's say you have a legacy system that's been operating for many years, disparate apps, often hundreds of a mix of custom apps, third-party apps, and it's all just running as is. If there's been legacy product owners, people that configured things, and they're running as is. But now, when you have to, let's say, completely evacuate an Active Directory or a tenant, that all has to be exposed. And it's often a challenge to, you'll have situations like, well, the person who developed that is no longer with the company, or the original product owner is no longer there. We don't know what that is, or even they don't even know about the existence of the app, never mind who runs it. So that's some of the key challenges of a project like this.
So which emphasize the fact that the IT shops running today, they have to have the proper inventory no matter what, right?
Yes.
But that would be a kind of situation where if you did have everything being mapped with the proper applications owners and understand what is being or not supported by whom would help greatly on moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a sliding scale. Of course, you have companies that do a better job than others. But I'll say even in the largest, most professional orgs, there's a lot of legacy technical debt that really gets uncovered in these types of projects.
Got it. Perfect. So just to recap, we talked about identity. We talked a little bit about SMTP and domains and what you had, that challenge that you had when an email to be going out and receiving from a specific domain name and so on. Microsoft workloads, right? SharePoint,
Yes.
OneDrive, and so on for two different companies potentially. We haven't touched much about the hybrids and cloud to cloud. We're going to do this next over there. And most importantly, I think having the proper inventory of what you have running in your company today and what is or isn't supported by whom, it's extremely important, right?
Perfect, yes. And I think maybe the one other thing I want to touch on is migration tooling. So once we developed all that initial understanding of the identities, the workloads, we start our end state solutioning design, you have to then tie a migration process to each of those workloads. And sometimes that involves, or often that involves third-party tools. Some of the workloads can't be migrated with third-party tools, so that overall, that aspect of migration tooling and migration process is also a key part of those initial phases.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to switch subjects in a second, and let's get back. All right, Vaz, let's talk about the different types of migrations and focusing first on a cloud-to-cloud migration and the challenges that you see out there. People might have different opinions as to how easy or hard it is, some of those. Talk to us about it. What you've seen and what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's a bit counterintuitive. But cloud-to-cloud migrations are actually more complex than on-premises to cloud migrations. And some of the reasons for that are, I think it starts with domains and SMTP domains. You can only have a domain tied to one M365 tenant.
Okay.
So if a migration is occurring, and as part of this migration, the migrating users have to maintain the same SMTP domain post-migration, that puts you in a position where you have to do a big bang or knife edge type cutover, often over a weekend. And that places lots of technical constraints in the sense that you have to pre-fill all the data, all the workload data into the target tenant in advance while not having the domain there. And then over the weekend have to have this point upon which you complete the data migrations, extract the domain off the source tenant, apply it to the target tenant, and then update all of the objects.
So because you don't manage the environment in the same way that you would with an on-premises system, what do you see happening there?
Yes. Well, that extraction, and maybe it doesn't sound that bad. Okay, you just run a bunch of scripts to strip the domain, then you just pull it off, put it on the other tenant. In reality, it's extremely challenging. The domain tends to get stuck in the source tenant because it's not as simple as just stripping off of mailboxes, groups, contacts, teams, and away you go, especially on large-scale projects when there's tens of thousands of objects. That final removal step might take hours to run, and you have no option other than just wait.
I see.
And then when you're applying it to the target tenant, you then have to have this be ready to execute a whole series of scripts to then update the target objects and all object types, right?
Okay.
Users, shared mailboxes, resources, contacts, groups, teams, etc. And you have to be extremely precise and prepared for this type of transition.
So that brings us to think about your relationship with Microsoft, right? So I would assume that at one point we might have to go and contact them or prepare them. So have you run into situations where you need to work with Microsoft during those migrations?
Absolutely. I mean, one notable one comes to mind when we were doing a merger of 50,000 plus users for a prominent transportation and aerospace company. And we were at our Big Bang cutover weekend. I think I even had team members sleeping at my house. It was that level of all hands on deck. And we executed the scripts in the source tenant. There was about half the users, 25,000 plus. We execute all the scripts. Of course, it's not just all scripts against the tenant. We're running scripts against on-premise Active Directory, running synchronizations, running scripts against cloud-only objects. And we get to the final step where we remove the domain and it's just stuck. It's spinning for hours, and we had to get Microsoft on the call, escalate, and hours pass, it's still not removed. Microsoft said there's nothing really we can do on this, and I recall at one point even the client saying, hey, maybe we should plan for a rollback. And I'm thinking, there is no rollback at this point. Like we're in too deep.
You're touching about 25,000 plus 25,000. What's the size of environments in that kind of situation that could get you in trouble, right?
Absolutely. And then thankfully, eventually, the domain did get removed. So and then we did apply it to the target tenant, run all the scripts in the target on-premise Active Directories and the cloud, and the users were all able to log in Monday morning. But for that particular scenario was probably the most stressful M&A cutover weekend, and I looked at that example as once I've been through that scenario, we can tackle any M&A challenges.
Got it. So, and I understand one thing, right? So when you are to discuss from an architecture perspective and provide the clients with the guidance that you believe that should be given, you might be facing some challenges. There's very smart people at times joining those calls to discuss options for you to go and perform migration one way or another. At which point you would go and think or consider the fact that you might need not to use the current entities that exist, but actually create a brand new entity to get those two companies merged into something that's brand new.
That's a great question because oftentimes, if the executives or people involved will say, hey, let's have a fresh start and move these two entities into a brand new entity without fully understanding the technical implications. I can definitely see the benefits of starting a new Active Directory forest with a clean forest name that doesn't have any legacy names tied to it, or having a brand new tenant. But for me, there has to be a very high bar to requiring a completely third tenant, because the way I see that is you will 100% disrupt both existing companies by taking them all to a fresh platform. Whereas if we do more of a hybrid approach of merging one entity into the other, then there's still going to be impact to the target company that we're merging into, but much less than full upheaval of both entities into a fresh new start. So sometimes it's required, we understand that, but there's been actually several notable instances where projects have been failed or on the path to failure, and we've been pulled in and we've been able to redesign the solution for a less disruptive model.
You got it. So, and I can see this happening, right? So where one company might not want to accommodate the name of the other company, right? and they believe that email addresses are not the only thing that needs to be considered, but actually sometimes cosmetic changes that say, I don't want that name to show to clients and so on and so forth, right? But something got to give. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, sometimes these, like you said, these things can get political, and we understand that there's times where it would be ideal to be completely fresh, but you just have to weigh the risks and benefits of undertaking that. So sometimes when, say, we don't want to see the legacy name, but we can show them that your Active Directory forest name, even if it has a legacy name, will never be visible to anyone else other than your internal operations teams, not even to your own end users, that type of thing.
Okay, perfect. No, that's great. So we talked about some unique challenges and case studies right there, as well as cloud-to-cloud migration. Those are two major subjects when we start talking to clients about these M&As at the beginning, at early stages, right? Just to close off, Vaz, let's talk about some of the best practices and lessons learned. What comes to your mind when we are to embark into a discussion with a client that is planning to going to merge with somebody else or will be acquired by others?
Yeah, I mean, to sum it up, I think we touched upon several of the key areas, but to highlight definitely the governance models that we talked about, the communication models to the end users. And I just want to add there, like, what we generally tell companies is that when you're communicating with your end users, migrations are disruptive. And despite the years of experience we have and all the technical challenges that we can overcome, I never come into a complex project and just tell them it's all going to be roses. There will be challenges, and we're upfront about all of those. And as it relates to end users, and I'm not blaming end users, we love them, but they don't always read emails or follow instructions, and you just have to be aware. And in different companies, you're going to have different levels of technology skills among your end users. So that's really, really an important area that you have to focus on. And sometimes you'll see as you pilot things that you might actually have to do a technology pivot or a communication pivot based on the response you're getting from your end users and how disruptive it may or may not be to them and how they're able to process any instructions that they need to follow.
That dictates how important it is for you to have a good team for change management, right? So it's not only the technologists out there, but great communicators are required on such operations, right?
Fantastic point. So ultimately, end of the day, we're techies, and it works best. We're able to bring in change management resources when required, but it also greatly benefits us when companies themselves have well-developed change management teams that can create the necessary communications to their end users, understand their user base, and can also do things like, create shared areas where people can come with their problem or train up their service desk. What this brings to mind is the fact that we're also often asked, how quick can you do this? Or what's the throughput you can get on the migrations? And we actually explain that often, and this might be surprising to some, often the migration throughput is not your limiting factor. It's things like, how much can your help desk support the next morning? Or what kind of on-site resources do you have to support the migration? So that actually becomes more of a bottleneck than how much throughput can we push into M365?
It's more human resources than technical resources.
Exactly.
Right? So technology is not the bottleneck, but how fast you can actually catch up with the technology is the question.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I think we covered the last topic, which is the best practices and lessons learned out there. And that's it. So thank you very much again, Vaz, and I hope to see you soon in the next episode.
Thank you.